Jae-won Lim had built his fortune with his own hands. At 61, his salt-and-pepper hair and quiet, measured presence carried the kind of authority that needed no announcement. He had started with nothing in Busan and built his way to Seoul, where his company now occupied an entire tower in Gangnam, and his name appeared in financial newspapers with the kind of regularity reserved for men who had remade themselves completely. But none of it meant anything now. Not the estate in Seongbukdong. Not the awards lining the walls of his study. Not the company that bore his name. What mattered now was the small boy at the center of his world, and the terrible stillness that had settled over that boy like a fog that would not lift. His son, Junho, was 3 years old. Before the accident, he had been the kind of child who made strangers smile on the subway, all dimples and mischief, and a laugh that sounded like bells. He had inherited his late mother's warm eyes and Jae-won's stubborn chin. People said he was extraordinary. Jae-won had believed it with every cell in his body. Then a distracted driver had run a red light on a Tuesday afternoon on a rain-slicked street in Mapo, and the world had cracked straight down the middle. Junho survived. That was the miracle Jae-won clung to in the dark hours of the night. But the little boy who came home from the hospital was not the same child who had left it. He was paralyzed from the waist down. He had stopped laughing. He had stopped speaking. He sat in his small blue wheelchair and watched the world with eyes that seemed to be looking at something far beyond whatever room he was in. Jae-won responded the way he responded to every threat in his life. He fortified. He hired. He controlled. He had the Seongbukdong estate rewired and outfitted with a camera system so comprehensive it would have impressed a government intelligence agency. 42 lenses mounted in corners and ceilings and hallways, feeding live footage to a bank of monitors in his home office. He watched them the way other men watch the stock market. With dread, with hunger, with the belief that if he just paid close enough attention, disaster could be prevented. He had burned through 6 caregivers in 4 months. A young woman from Incheon let Junho sit in a wet shirt for 11 minutes before changing him, and Jae-won had her bags packed by the time she finished her shift. A man with 20 years of pediatric experience at a children's hospital in Sincheon spoke too sharply when Junho knocked over his water cup. Gone before dinner. A third checked her phone while Junho was eating, and that was that. People called Jae-won impossible. He did not disagree. His son had already lost too much. He would not lose one more thing. The agency in Itaewon, which specialized in placing international caregivers with families across Seoul, sent him Nadia Osai on a Wednesday morning in October. She had come to Korea 3 years earlier, drawn by the country's reputation for excellent medical infrastructure, working first at a rehabilitation center in Yongsan before moving into private care. She was 52 years old, with a broad, steady face and the kind of calm that did not feel performed. Her references were impeccable. 3 Seoul families had written letters that read less like professional recommendations and more like personal tributes. During the interview, she had looked Jae-won directly in the eye when he told her about Junho, not with pity, but with a deep, anchored attention, as if she were filing every detail somewhere important inside herself. He had hired her with less certainty than he wanted to feel. She arrived on her first day carrying a canvas bag, wearing a green and white uniform pressed so cleanly it looked new. She greeted Jae-won with a respectful bow and Junho with something softer. She crouched in front of the wheelchair and looked at the boy for a long moment without speaking, as if she were simply giving him the space to look back. Then she said, very quietly, "My name is Nadia. I like the color of your chair. Blue is a serious color. It means the person sitting in it is someone worth paying attention to." Junho did not respond, but he did not look away. Jae-won retreated to his office and turned on the monitors. The first week was unremarkable in the best possible sense. Nadia worked with the quiet precision of someone who had spent decades learning exactly how much to do and exactly when to step back. She managed Junho's physical therapy exercises with patience that never tipped into pity. She prepared his meals according to the dietary plan Jae-won had printed in 12-point font and laminated, navigating the Korean ingredients in the kitchen with a respectful curiosity, asking the housekeeper questions, and writing the answers in a small notebook she kept in her uniform pocket. She narrated the world to Junho in a gentle, unhurried voice, not expecting replies, simply offering words like gifts he could open later if he chose. It was on the 5th day that Jae-won first heard her sing. He was deep in a quarterly report when the sound reached him through the monitor speakers, soft enough that he thought at first it was the television. But then he turned up the volume and understood what he was hearing. Nadia was in the kitchen slicing Korean pear while Junho sat at the table, and she was singing in a language Jae-won did not recognize, something low and rolling, a melody that seemed to carry its own weight. Her voice was not trained or polished. It was something better. It was true. It moved through the kitchen like water through old stone, finding every crack. Jae-won watched the monitor and noticed Junho. The boy's head had turned. He was watching Nadia with a concentration Jae-won had not seen in months, tracking her movement from the counter to the refrigerator to the table, as if the song were a thread and she were pulling it. Jae-won did not go back to his report. Over the days that followed, he noticed the tears. When Junho napped, when the house settled into its midday quiet, Nadia would sometimes sit at the kitchen table and bow her head. Her shoulders would rise and fall. She never made a sound, but on the monitor it was unmistakable. Jae-won increased his scrutiny. He reviewed footage backward and forward looking for any sign that something was wrong with Junho's care, any shadow of cruelty or negligence. He found nothing. With Junho, Nadia was unimpeachable. The grief she carried, whatever it was, she carried it alone, setting it down completely every time the boy needed her. He could not make sense of it. He filed it away and kept watching. 3 weeks after her first day, Jae-won was still in his office at 9:30 when he checked the monitor for Junho's room. Nadia should have left an hour ago, but she was still there, seated in the low chair beside Junho's bed, speaking to him in the dim amber glow of the nightlight. The autumn wind pressed against the windows of the Seongbukdong house, rattling the old pines in the garden, and inside everything was still. Jae-won turned up the volume slowly, as if afraid the sound might break. She was saying, "When I look at you, Junho, I sometimes have to look away for a moment because I see my daughter." Her name was Abina. She would have been almost exactly your age. Jae-won went very still. She was the most alive person I had ever known, and she was only 2 years old. She got sick quickly. The kind of sickness that does not negotiate and does not wait. I was here in Seoul when she fell ill back home in Kumasi, and I got on the first flight I could find, but the distance was so great and the hours were so long, and by the time I landed there was almost no time left. I held her hand. I sang to her the same songs my mother sang to me when I was small, because I wanted the last thing she heard in this world to be something beautiful. She passed 18 months ago. Nadia's voice did not break. It simply became very careful, the way a person walks near the edge of something. I was not sure I could do this kind of work afterward. How do you care for other people's children when your own is gone? But I kept thinking about the children who needed someone. I kept thinking that the love I still carry for Abina has to go somewhere. It is too much love to bury. So I came back to Seoul. I came back because pouring it into a child who needs it is the closest thing I have found to still being her mother. She reached out and touched Junho's hand where it rested on the blanket. Your father loves you more than he knows how to say. I can see it in how hard he is trying. And you, sweet boy, you are not broken. You are gathering yourself. Take all the time you need. I will be here. Jae-won sat in his chair in the dark for a long time. He did not look at the other monitors. He did not open his email. He sat with what he had heard until it settled somewhere permanent inside him. He understood the crying now. Not weakness, not trouble, overflow. The love she had carried for Abina had no child to land on anymore, so it kept rising in her, and sometimes it spilled over in those quiet kitchen moments when she thought no one was watching. And then she would dry her eyes and return to his son and give it all away again, every day, without being asked, without being thanked. The change in Junho came gradually, and then suddenly, the way the cherry blossoms come back to Buckhanson each spring, impossible, and then everywhere at once. He began turning toward the sound of Nadia's footsteps before she entered a room. He began reaching for the Korean pear cut into the rabbit shapes she had learned from the housekeeper, because she noticed Junho watched the process with interest. One morning, Jae-won watched on the monitor as Nadia began her morning song, and saw the left corner of Junho's mouth pull upward, fleeting and small, but unmistakably a smile. Jae-won pressed his fist against his mouth. The breakthrough happened on a Thursday, in the gray Seoul afternoon light that filters through paper screen doors in old Seongbukdong houses, the kind of light that has no equivalent anywhere else in the world. Jae-won was on a call with his board when the alert sound on his secondary monitor made him look up. He unmuted the room feed and heard it clearly, a small, deliberate voice, scratchy from months of disuse. Nadia. He told the board he would call them back. She had frozen in the middle of the playroom, a toy in each hand, eyes wide and bright. Yes, she said, and her voice barely held together. Yes, baby, right here. Sing the river song. She knelt beside him and she sang, and halfway through the first verse, Junho began to hum, low and uncertain and absolutely perfect. Jae-won watched from the monitor, a man who had spent 40 years learning to keep his face still in boardrooms and negotiations and at his wife's funeral, and felt tears run down both cheeks without bothering to wipe them away. He walked downstairs and stood in the doorway of the playroom. Nadia looked up, and the joy on her face shifted to caution immediately, that particular caution of an employee who has just been caught being human. Before she could apologize for anything, Junho said, "Appa," the Korean word for dad, a word Jae-won had not heard from his son in 6 months. He crossed the room in 3 steps and gathered his son against his chest and held him there, one hand spread across the small boy's back, feeling him breathe, feeling the Seongbukdong house breathe around them, the old pines in the garden sighing in the October wind outside. When he looked up at Nadia, he had to wait a moment before he could speak. He told her about the cameras then, every room, every angle. He told her he had watched her each day looking for something to condemn and had found instead something he had no category for. He told her he had heard what she said to Junho about Abina, and he told her he was sorry, plainly and without performance, the way one person is sorry to another. In Korean culture, a man of his generation did not easily say such things to an employee. He said them anyway, because some moments are larger than habit. Nadia absorbed this with the same steadiness she brought to everything. She said only, "I should have told you about my daughter from the beginning." Jae-won shook his head. "You owed me your professional record. That was all. What you carry personally is yours. But you chose to share it with my son, and that choice gave him something back that I had started to believe was gone. There is no word for what I owe you." She looked at Junho and then back at Jae-won. "You owe me nothing. This is what this work has always meant to me." Jae-won looked at his son, who was watching Nadia with a calm and open face, waiting for her to come back and sit beside him. Jae-won recognized that expression. He had felt it himself lately when he heard her coming down the hallway in the morning. That particular ease of a person in the presence of someone safe. He asked her to stay permanently, not as an employee, he said, as family. The word felt unfamiliar in his mouth, shaped differently than it had been before his wife died, before the accident, before the long months of silence in a house that was too large for grief to echo properly. And yet it felt exactly right. She accepted without hesitation. In the months that followed, the house in Seongbukdong changed its character entirely. Junho regained partial movement in one leg, which his physical therapist at Severance Hospital called medically remarkable, and which Nadia called exactly what she knew was coming. He learned to operate a modified electric chair and developed strong opinions about which path to take through the garden to reach the kitchen door. He laughed again, openly. At Nadia's songs, when she deliberately sang the wrong words to see whether he was paying attention. He always was. Nadia brought her mother's recipes into their kitchen, and the housekeeper taught her to make doenjang jjigae in return. The 2 women working side by side at the stove on Saturday mornings, while Junho watched from his chair and offered unsolicited opinions about the seasoning. Jae-won learned to pronounce Abina correctly, holding the name carefully in his mouth, and Nadia learned the Korean words Junho had grown up hearing, so that the Seongbukdong house became a place threaded through with 2 languages and the warmth that exists between people who have decided to stop being strangers to each other. The cameras stayed on the walls. Jae-won never removed them, but he stopped watching them. He had learned what he had needed to know, that the thing he had been trying to secure with technology and distance and an endless rotation of disposable employees was not actually security at all. It was trust. And trust did not arrive through a lens. It arrived the way Nadia had arrived, on a Wednesday morning in October, stepping through the old wooden gate of a Seongbukdong estate with steady hands, and a heart full of sorrow that she had somehow kept from hardening, ready to love his son as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Because to her, it was. The cameras had shown Jae-won the truth he had installed them to find. Not negligence, not danger, not the threat he had spent months bracing for. Just a woman in a green and white uniform sitting beside a small boy in the dark, sharing the most precious thing she had left, telling him with her whole tired heart that he was worth it, that he mattered, that love does not run out just because the person it was meant for is gone. It finds somewhere else to go. It always does. If this story moved you, please like it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that goodness is still out there, and subscribe so you never miss another one. And leave us a comment below. Tell us about someone who showed up in your life with a broken heart and chose to love anyway. Your story might be the thing that gets someone else through today.